we're all wrapped up with what Max Verstappen just said, but what are Aston Martin doing? Because I think Papa Stroll's sad walk back to his car after day 2 tells you pretty much all you need to know. That Stroll out of the paddock didn't really look like a man who was loving life right now with his team, sort of reminding me of how he looked at the Tokyo Motor Show, when showcasing the Honda power unit and their official beginning with that partnership. Back there, one could mask the concern or somber atmosphere through Japanese business-style etiquette and pragmatism, but hands in pockets right here just to get to the car and get out of there? Yeah, that doesn't look good. Now, I mentioned Aston's plight in my video briefly from yesterday, in that the read on the first couple of days wasn't all that ideal. What the team seems to be dealing with is something that has been aggressively developed in terms of the bodywork, even though Adrian seems to think, well, that aggressive? You might call it aggressive, well, not me. But it's turned out to be chronically underpowered, and I'm not talking about necessarily the limitation they've actually imposed on it. We might be seeing an engine that might not be fully up to speed with the way it handles the combustion side and the electrical side. Something that has become very clear in the last few weeks is going to be the thing that wins potentially championships. Because in the rush to try and catch up with the rest of the field, it's really laid out for all to see the pitfalls with this particular car, and it really goes to show that what Williams did in skipping the shakedown might have been for the absolute best, because they saved themselves a whole lot of heartache. And that maybe Aston Martin got the wrong picture regarding where Formula 1 is going, where, according to Max, it's descended to being Formula E on steroids. Oh boy, I can't wait for Dan Ticktum to come out swinging after that remark. In any case, if you're an Aston Martin fan right there, you're probably in a bad place at the moment, and I do feel your pain, because I was experiencing this back over at McLaren in 2015. Curiously enough, with also brand new Honda power. And also, this team has been hyping up this partnership with them since 2023, when they signed the deal. The last 2.5 years or so has been a bit of a worldwide tour of celebration and looking forward to potentially being Constructors' Championships. Honda's ambitions stronger than ever after all the glory with Max Verstappen. We all thinking, yeah, they actually understand what Formula 1 is all about. It's not going to be like them having been gone for a while, then coming back and then having no clue. They might have a clue. Oh no, it's exactly the same. But now they're in the middle of a hangover, and there is a sobering realization. Oh, so that's it, Law? They just built a bad car? Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Because how is that even possible given the brain trust they've amassed and the facilities at their disposal? It might be more like they built the right kind of car for the wrong kind of reality. Yeah, an absolutely agile car when at full speed. But when asked to manage the powertrain, it's just going, okay, well, it's okay to be irked with this new reality, because we've been conditioned for several decades at this point that having great aerodynamics will win the day. And it helps that we can actually see it. Usually a car that looks aggressive turns out to be just that. So Newey arrives, and what we get with the AMR 26 gets people talking, that it's something that looks out of this world. It doesn't look like anything else on the grid. And the team looks like it's finally put on its grown-up clothes and is actually starting to take itself and the sport seriously. 2026 might be the year where they really could establish themselves as an elite team in waiting, maybe trying to court elite drivers to come and join their cause, either to replace Fernando Alonso or maybe both seats. And whilst the livery does look very nice on the actual car, what we have now seen has proven that 2026's regulations are not an aero-first era, no. It is energy first. Performance lives in software, it lives in the thermals, it lives in the deployment, not necessarily in how slippery the car is on the track. It's still an important facet to the car. You're not going to get anywhere with really good deployment in a boat. That's why Max's rant hit so hard, because, well, he was able to demonstrate this in practice and be an absolute natural at it. But just because he is, doesn't mean he has to like it. Yeah, that might sound dramatic to you, but you've really got to consider what these brand new stipulations and specifications are actually instructing and insisting teams to actually do. Because you've got the electric side and the combustion side now together, and there is no real diaspora in terms of distribution. It's pretty much equal. And once you can accept that, you can start to look at what's been going on in the test session with Aston Martin in a whole new way. We've seen a really tightly packaged aggressive car, and within just a few laps we saw cooling vents being added to it. Uh-oh, that's not good. And not to mention more detuned running after Honda's data anomaly on day 1 of Bahrain testing. We still have not seen this car unleashed. They're still debugging the universe, so it would seem. And debugging the universe is how you could wind up burning through half a season before you even know it. It also suggests that they don't yet trust the operating window of the car. And you know exactly what that means. A narrow operating window. We could be seeing not a Red Bull second seed curse, but an Aston Martin curse. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the aero concept of this car is doomed. It might turn out to be absolutely fantastic once they can actually turn the taps on full. It was closer than we saw in Barcelona, but it's still not up to full chat. Potentially, their weapons could turn out to be mighty. But the fact is, though, is that they can't fire those weapons right now. It's a car that's still negotiating, and the negotiations are around the ability to be able to deploy power constantly whenever you need it. If you can get that down, you can cure a heck of a lot of problems because you won't have to worry about the battery conking out on you, or not having enough charge to sustain a qualifying lap, or having to downshift or upshift in the middle of a corner. I think I heard one TikToker call it plug shifting, and the fastest teams like Red Bull seem to have been able to manage this somewhat, and they'll have repeatable power that won't roast the car, and it'll give the driver less to do, even though they will still have plenty to do. And a good package will make the driver feel brave. A bad systems package makes them feel busy, which means right now, Newey's impressive looking bodywork doesn't really count for toffee. It might be too extreme at this point in time, that he might have gone a little bit too hard, because opening cooling outlets, that's the oldest tale in the sport, that the team's having to compromise something just to keep the damn car alive. Because as we've been told time and time again, every single time we go to the Mexican Grand Prix, if you have to rely on opening up the car and adding vents, you are going to lose aerodynamic efficiency. Sure, Alonso managed to rack up almost 100 laps on day 2, and Stroll's managed to get a fairly decent start at the beginning of day 3, but the car is still slow on the straights compared to others. It doesn't look calm in the corners either, according to observers, the car perhaps not at its ideal balance point. Something of which Lance actually commented on after day 1, that the car lacked energy, it lacked balance, it lacked grip, it lacked pretty much everything. And yes, I know, we're tempted to be thinking that sandbagging is going on here, that Aston Martin isn't showing its full hand, and that is kind of valid since they are not running the car at full speed, but the way the body language seems to be with every single time you look in the garage and everyone looks really despondent, and even the drivers haven't really got much to say about it, and even Lance coming out and being this verbose, yeah, something's going on here in a manner that we are not seeing from either Mercedes, Red Bull, or even Ferrari. Yeah, what I'm trying to get at here is that what we're seeing with Aston is not performative, it's serious, it's real. Because there is a timeline problem to consider, because not that long ago, Adrian Newey just came out and said that in terms of development, the AMR 26 is 4 months behind schedule when compared to other teams, in that they only got the basic concept of the 26 car in the wind tunnel in the middle of April. So thusly, it created a compression cycle, and meaning that everything had to be built super fast, and a last-minute build, meaning that they barely made it out to day 4 of the shakedown. Day 5, not really much to say about that either in comparison to the other teams. Thusly, they didn't have the luxury of being able to do all the boring integration stuff early and behind closed doors. They are doing all of their troubleshooting in real time in front of everyone. The entire world is seeing the Aston Martin team debugging their car, whilst all of the other teams, they either were able to do it in solitude, or they had it in the relatively private sanctity of the Circuit de Catalunya, even though that in itself was more public than they probably would have liked. So maybe they had to commit to packaging stuff early because they wouldn't have had the time to be able to refine it behind the scenes. So what we saw was a really developed aero package, probably way further along than they would have liked to have actually manufactured, or maybe Honda's far behind the curve, and Adrian Newey asked the world, and the best that Honda could offer was the moon. Just that means they had something to work with at the shakedown and at the first pre-season test. And it's the same exact situation that Williams could have put themselves in if they chose to rush, and they certainly didn't have the capacity to do so. Because what we have right here may be a Newey-style tight suit, and in 2026, tight suits like these could probably choke you to death. A breathable boxy car, perhaps like the Williams FW48, might be the faster car. That's really nasty philosophical whiplash for Newey stands, and Papa Stroll, since, well, he bought into aerodynamic design supremacy, and look where it's got him right now. And as a single team works project, Aston's had fewer early warning signs or laps than either of their rivals or other manufacturers who've been able to benefit from way more data with customer feedback. Even Red Bull Ford appears further along than Honda does. Even Audi does. And they've had their own fair share of reliability issues, but they've been able to at least been around since day one of the Barcelona shakedown, and has actually been able to innovate a little bit because they had the bandwidth and the time to be able to develop the car and then add newer parts to it later. What with its side pod inlets that look like the screen. Only having one teams mean you have far fewer variables to consider, and you don't have the sight of Franco Colapinto just casually walking up to Toto and providing his own two penneth regarding the Mercedes power unit. You don't have that range of drivers to pull from. You have Fernando and you have Lawrence. And again, Aston's trying to do all of this troubleshooting in public, and it's just absolutely brutal. And then Lance's quote, circulating more than Fernando's, that's not an accident, about needing to find roughly 4 seconds of pace at this time. And whilst Lance has been able to do a couple of glory runs on the softer tyre in day 3 of testing, he is still, at this time of recording, 4.7 seconds slower than George Russell. And Lance even coming out and saying this right now is a really wild thing to do, and it really goes to show the internal mood is bleak. You forget sandbags. The bags they've got right now are full of salt. I can't imagine anyone working at Aston Martin would have appreciated Lance coming out and saying that. I mean, if you're working for Aston Martin and you're watching this video, you can either drop a private message to me and confirm that, or type it out in the comments if you feel to be brave. As for Fernando, you think he would be absolutely seething. He's sounding more cookie cutter though, and that is usually what a veteran does when the garage is already hot enough. He's learned well enough over his time not to pour petrol on things unless things are absolutely hopeless. And if you've watched him for long enough, he has a special talent for dark comedy when he thinks a project is near its death. And right now, he's not doing that yet, so maybe take that as a little net positive, perhaps? It's Lance who's doing all of that, and even going as far as pulling a Lewis Hamilton last year by just pointing out, oh, well, at least the weather's nice, and you know things are bad when a driver is talking about the weather. I'm British. We are naturals at talking about the weather, and if we get to that situation, there is really nothing else to say. And also, it could be a sign of frustration, because as of recording, Lawrence Stroll has had far less mileage than Fernando Alonso has had in that same car. As of now, Fernando Alonso is their reference driver, because Stroll hasn't even done a full race distance yet, or he's just about to cross it in cumulative terms for the very first time across the shakedown, across day 1 and now day 3. Whereas other drivers have probably been able to do near half a dozen race distances. And in a regulation reset like this, the reference driver is the guy who gives repeatable feedback that matches the sensors and gives you something to work with in regards to all of the new stuff going on with the car. Fernando might be able to make it work based on all of his experience, but he's probably not loving it right now. And it really doesn't help that as of this recording, I have just seen on the newsfeed that even Aston Martin's homegrown gearbox is showing signs of trouble. This is something that they made, and even they can't get a good handle of it. Everything will get built around that, and Aston Martin, need to build really, really quickly. And that's how that could end up making the other driver look absolutely poor, because they are not really having much of a say in what's being developed. This is a real crunch time for this team. They are going to have to rely on Lance and Fernando more than ever. And if this is a situation where Stroll simply cannot handle the pressure or have an answer to things, well, what's that going to mean for his future? To try and rebuild, Lance may not be useful, because he won't really have an answer. The fact he was this morose on day 1. But let's cut back to Papa Stroll's sad walk for a moment, because when the boss looks like that, it usually means the briefings are not reassuring. Owners don't tend to get depressed over one bad day. They get depressed when the team probably tells them that the timeline is slipping, the fixes are non-trivial, and that maybe the next day will be just yet another long day of learning instead of maybe being able to turn up the heat a little bit. If that were the case, then Papa might have looked a little less dour, or maybe at least not had his hands in his pockets. Instead, we are seeing a Papa who is absolutely reeling, an absolutely somber figure, who is coming to terms that after years of hyping this team up, saying, a great driver, a great engine, a great designer equals elite, that doesn't necessarily equate to what you might expect. Or at the very least, it's not happening as cleanly as he hoped it would. Okay, so what's going on? Well, what I've been trying to say is that Aston Martin may have built a car that could be capable of really good things, but in its current state, it's not been able to just get out there and bang out lap times and bang out lap counts like pretty much every other team was able to do, bar maybe Audi and Cadillac. But they had a little bit of an excuse since Audi's completely brand new as a works team, and Cadillac, they're just brand new entirely. You could easily give them the benefit of the doubt, but Aston Martin? Team Silverstone? No, you don't give them that much accommodation, especially after all the talk they've been giving us the last few years, saying that they would be great, because the car right now can't fully deploy, and it's got an issue with thermal stability. Those two things are going to be really important. All the car's doing right now is showing how constrained it is, whilst other teams are now starting to maybe seek out how to refine and improve their setups, or maybe looking at a little bit of performance. Because it might end up with a situation that a team might not have the absolute fastest car, but if they can deploy the energy more effectively than the other team, even if they don't have the better chassis, that might be the thing that wins them more points or maybe get on the podium. And maybe this is why Max is furious, because he can feel the sport sliding toward an engineering discipline that lives somewhere between F1 and Formula E instead of just being purely Formula 1. And he hates that it changes what driving means. And it was the perfect opportunity for Lando to get a dig on Max, basically him saying, "Oh, well, I'm fine. Hey, hey." Also, there's Aston's glamorous partnerships to consider, especially their title sponsors, Aramco, and the Saudi Public Investment Fund. They could end up being either a quiet strength or a loud distraction in this situation, because fuel and combustion mapping are important, but the early visible problems look more like integration and reliability, because the danger out of all of this is thinking, well, what's going on here? Why are they so slow? Oh, is it to do with that sustainable fuel that Aramco is supplying, even though they've had plenty of experience over 2025 in Formula 2 and Formula 3? Is that why they're so slow? Is that why Honda is having problems? Oh, yeah, so much for Aramco. Look like a bunch of no-hopers. I mean, it's all through association. It might be a simple situation that Honda is just well behind the curve, that it's not been up to scratch in terms of the demands of Adrian Newey's packaging, which has had to been rushed to try and even get a car out there in the first place. It's a little messy, that there's a lot of finger-pointing going on here, and quite clearly, I can't imagine Aramco would want to have a finger pointed at them, especially considering they control a fairly sizable chunk of the team's own finances. Not ideal. You're also seeing some fingers being pointed at Newey himself. The honeymoon period clearly over. That whole by design campaign we saw up until the livery launch, which had its own fair share of issues, that's not aging well, is it, after only a week? No, not even that. His experience could help the team out eventually, but it's clearly not going to save them right now, because his strengths are more lethal once the team can actually iterate and develop cleanly. They are not right now. Right now, it's acting like a supercar with flat tyres, and it's just reminding me of the initial years of Adrian Newey at Red Bull, where, yeah, he was an absolute wizard, one of the best in his field. But if the infrastructure simply wasn't there to be able to fully realise his dreams and his ideals and his sketches, then you really can't get the maximum out of it. The AMR26 is another RB3. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they might be onto the best ticket with Adrian in terms of his aerodynamics, because aerodynamics may not be the hero act of this regulation cycle. As I said, it might be down to the way the energy and the combustion work in harmony, and being able to translate it onto the road with good suspension. That means you don't end up all skittish and therefore you lose confidence. You want to trust the car and having consistent power deployment. So this chart I found from F1 telemetry data that's doing the rounds is both tempting and dangerous, because it doesn't factor into the equation that Aston is protecting the Honda engine from going bang and also opening cooling vents. This is not a fair representation on what Aston Martin might be able to do in the next test session next week, when they might be able to do a little more. Which is exactly when my It's Just Testing bro shirt will vanish, never to be seen again in its current guise. Because it won't be testing anymore, bro. Well, okay, so what does Aston Martin do now it's having to reel with the effects of hiring an engineering designing god? This is the part where the hangover is going to hurt the most. Top drivers whom Aston may wish to scout in the years to come don't need a guarantee of instant wins exactly, but they need a believable slope. Just take a look at what Carlos Sainz is going through over at Williams. He put faith in that team, and after a rocky start, he got a couple of podiums for his trouble. He saw what was going on at the team behind the scenes and was sold. And what Carlos may have also witnessed was that when the team hit a wall, the wall got either moved quickly, or James Vowles was able to show a detailed breakdown, a painfully detailed breakdown, of how the wall will be moved in due course, once the team's resources were up and running. In the case of Aston, They are further along in that regard. Their resources are up and running, they're just not fully calibrated yet. And what they also need to show future talent if they ever knock on their door or darken their doorstep is that if plan A fails, they have a solid plan B behind them, and then a plan C, and then if there is not a plan D, they don't end up flailing around and either blaming other people or just going, I don't know. So in that regard, for their long-term future, I wouldn't really worry about a bad singular test. I would be more concerned if we saw this during the flyaway races, a bad first third of the season. If they had any hopes of hiring a disenfranchised Charles Leclerc or a kicked-out George Russell from Mercedes, then they'll have another thing coming. They can easily forget about that. Max Verstappen in your dreams. And if Fernando Alonso decides that he's had enough of all of this and he doesn't want to see out his contract and he calls it a day after 2026, like Lewis Hamilton might do, Max Verstappen might do, then where does this leave Aston Martin? They won't have a big-name driver, a champion, to fall back on. In short, they won't be in a fit state to really reap the benefits of what could be a chaotic F1 silly season. Or it might turn out to be the dullest silly season of all time. Who knows? They might have to resort to begging Fernando Alonso not to retire for at least another year, and maybe trying to keep Lawrence Stroll sweet to suffer through yet another season of finding his feet. Him coming up towards a decade in Formula 1, and could he really be bothered of suffering the slings and arrows of yet another year, potentially struggling against his teammate, and facing ridicule from pretty much the majority of the F1 fanbase? And if we keep hearing this all the way through the Australian Grand Prix weekend, even though Adrian Newey has promised something very different, what that will tell everybody, especially any drivers, is that they are still finding their foundation for this brand new regulation cycle after all of this time. And if they can't do it at round one, when will they be able to do it? Certainly not in time to convince them when it comes to contract time. But if this car does turn out to be very different, and certainly a lot more stable and a lot more good in terms of performance, then the story will flip fast and they'll suddenly be back on the straight and narrow. Because Formula 1 is very quick like that. It is very shameless like that. It will learn to quickly forget maladies, because just look at what Williams has been doing right now. Not that long ago, we were making fun of them for missing the shakedown. Do we really care about that anymore? Because they are bossing Bahrain testing so far. Don't get me wrong. Aston's got a crisis on its hands, and it's a systems crisis, because they built a quite ambitious machine for a sport that may now revolve around energy and thermals and software, where a tight aerodynamic package may not really matter. And because they were late in their development cycle, so says Newey, they're learning all of these lessons in public with everyone pointing at them and laughing. And that's also why what Aston's going through feels a little bit like 2015 to some folks, the vibe being that the concept is fighting the laws of physics. But the difference between then and now, though, is that there's also the heat from the battery to consider too. It bigger than ever. Because when you can't use the power unit to its full potential, the entire car suffers. As we've seen time and time again when normies have been testing out Formula 1 cars, you need to absolutely wring the neck of a Formula 1 car if you want to get the best out of it. If you're too cautious, if you don't run fast enough, it's either going to seize up the brakes, or you're not going to get the most amount of aero for your buck. Any ideas or ambition that Adrian and his team are trying to show the world, it's being hidden, held hostage even, by maladies and limitations that we might not be able to see the intricacies of. And for a team that prides itself in presentation and telegraphing that they are an elite team and they deserve it and it's just a matter of time before they join the front running pack, the things that we have seen up until now, the last few weeks, it's been anything but. That's why the sad Papa meme was worth leading with. After years of promises, this is the moment Aston has to prove it can turn a glamorous vision into a functioning system. And the flyaway races will answer whether Aston can become the kind of team that fixes foundational problems quickly. That is the real elite test there, not just building up a really nice super team, because we all thought that Ferrari's 2025 vision was going to be a super team, and look where that wound up. And if we get into the actual season and Aston are still struggling, and then we get to the summer break and they're still struggling then, well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, yeah? And you can cross over to this video right here, which hopefully will be a little bit more cheerful than the one I've just showed you, even though I've just had to be real. I'll see you over there.